better. That's who we decided to be. You, me, the enterprise, the company, the we, wherever we at, regardless of borders and nationalities. We made up our minds to be better.
Welcome to the 2021 World's Most Ethical Companies Gala.
This is the first time we've been in a crowd of over thousands.
There's not a negative to being more inclusive.
Corporations can no longer just skirt by with minimum standards. Their responsibility is record high.
For the first time ever, business is the most trusted entity. So congratulations once again to the 2021 World's Most Ethical Companies.
Our future will receive the gift of better.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our inaugural conversation about the 2022 World's Most Ethical Companies process. We're so excited you're here to join us today and really officially kick off the 2022 application season. So a lot to talk about today, so we're going to jump right in. But before we do, a quick round of introductions from myself and the team. I am Doug Allen, serve as a managing director in our advisory group. I also serve as an assessment lead in the WMEC process as well. I'm joined today by my colleagues Neil Thurston, another lead in the assessment team, Jody Fredrickson, one of Ethisphere's senior compliance counsel, and leaders in our methodology development process, and also Sean Friedland, who serves as a strategic marketing director within the group, and we'll be speaking later about some of the key benefits and how we engage with you all as a community during the process as well. So very thankful and happy to be joined by my colleagues today. And in terms of what we'll cover on today's conversation, we really want to give you just a quick overview of, for those of you on the line who are brand new to Ethisphere and sort of the World's Most Ethical Companies process, who we are and sort of why this program was developed several years ago. We'll touch on some reasons why you should apply and the benefits of doing so. We'll look at in very detailed fashion, the components of an application and really what we look at as a team during that process. And for those of you on the line who are veterans to the process as well, we'll touch on really what's changed for the 2022 year. In detail. We've got some great new resources, some great new process changes we'll touch on as well. So we're excited to run through those in more detail. And then we'll also talk to, for those of you new on the line, how to get started, right? What are those first steps to take to really engage with the application process? Again, I'd mentioned my colleague Sean will jump in and talk about some of the benefits and the recognitions involved in the process. And then we'll close on some important dates and some other resource information as well. We welcome questions throughout. We've designed the application period to be both interactive between applicants in the community as well as us as the assessment team. So not only ask questions today, but we'll talk about other resources such as office hours and other ways you can get a hold of us to get your questions answered as well. So please engage throughout the conversation. We're happy to take your questions today and walk you through the process. So with that in mind, we want to first start with, again, a quick primer on who Ethisphere is for those of you on the line today who are brand new to our organization. And to put it in a brief statement, really, we are an organization, Ethisphere, who's a global leader in advancing the standards of ethical business practices. And we started about 16 years ago, really because we saw a need to define what's good in terms of corporate behavior, right? You can remember about that era, plenty of methods and ways to measure how businesses were doing things wrong, fines, debarments, the alphabet soup of DPAs, MPAs, CIAs. But there really wasn't a way to really celebrate and recognize and showcase companies doing business the right way. So that's really sort of the ground with which we sprung so many years ago. And we do that through three primary activities, right? We define what's good through our measurement processes and our methodologies. We measure and improve in collaboration with companies around the world. And we curate and convene, right? So we gather through our communities, both our World's Most Ethical Companies applicant community, but also groups such as our Business Ethics Leadership Alliance to share what we found in these assessments and really, again, rise all boats rather with the rising tide together. So we really want to share and celebrate those practices. And when you think about the World's Most Ethical Companies process as well, it's a pure manifestation of really what we do. And really, we get asked all the time why we do it. And we believe it matters, right? Good ethics, from our perspective, we truly believe is good business. Businesses that focus on the long term, that do business with integrity, and who invest in the communities in which they operate, we believe result in sustainable businesses that outperform, right? So we have research that we've done, such as the composition of world's most ethical companies versus a comparable index, to show outperformance from an equity standpoint. We believe there's retention outperformance on the retention of employees, attraction of investors, all kinds of different dimensions, which we believe drive the reasons why we do this. And again, the reason why we've developed the world's most ethical companies process is really, it's again, the most pure manifestation of sort of the three key tenets of what we do, right? We celebrate, we measure, we recognize, and then we convene as a community to share the results of that practice. So what is the world's most ethical companies process? Really, first and foremost, it's a way to celebrate all the hard work you all do, right? Celebrate and recognize the efforts of companies around the world who are doing business the right way. And I would also say that equal to that is a way in which we can engage and improve through measurement and benchmarking organizations, again, around the world, regardless of size or structure, right? So it's a process we recognize, but also measure and improve many others. And from those measurement efforts, we result in a data set that is vetted, that is trusted, and insights that result from that we can then share and really communicate across the community to, again, bolster everyone's program to improve around the world as well. So that's, again, a little bit behind why we do what we do and sort of the component pieces of the program. So with that context in mind, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Neil, who will touch on a little bit more specifically of what we look at as part of the assessment process. So Neil?
Thank you, Doug. Yes. So looking at this, we do have a set of criteria for applying. We'll discuss this a little bit later, but no, for those of you who've been through the process in prior years, we have not changed the criteria for application. Moving on a little bit to what gets evaluated. We do want to evaluate the whole company, and we've got to split up all of the different efforts that you have here. By and large, the ethics and compliance program here, you can see within the pie chart, comprises about 35% of what we're truly evaluating with the survey and with the documentation, with the efforts here, trying to get a sense of what you all have done, what you've improved upon, how you've grown as a company in that area. We're also looking at how you're looking at and measuring your culture of ethics. We assign about 20% of the value to that. We also look at your, to put it very simply, ESG efforts, your environmental efforts, your social impact, your look at all of these different impacts that your company and your employees have on the world around you. And we measure that at about 20% of the overall process. At 15%, but no less important, is that G from the ESG, the corporate governance, all of those special efforts that you, the board, and your top leadership put into making the company the best it can be and the most responsible it can be. Finally, and definitely not last, leadership and reputation. This area involves a bit of a media search and looking into what has your company been visibly doing. How have you been leading a lot of the conversation around ethics, around compliance, around issues that truly do matter to your communities, your employees, your clients, your customers, everybody involved? That comprises about 10% of our scoring. I do want to note, though, and this has definitely come up from time to time, there are situations where there may be media issues or other issues that we identify through a bit of our research, and we usually approach these on a case-by-case basis. Unfortunately, there are certain situations which can disqualify an organization from consideration, but those, again, are on a case-by-case situation and fairly rare. Let's see. How do we apply? First, well, okay, maybe not first, but there are three different aspects you can look at. You can really kind of do these in any order. But for the sake of simplicity, I'll just take this as a 1, 2, 3, the way it's laid out here. The first, and probably the most interesting part, is to complete the 2022 Ethics Quotient questionnaire, which we've mentioned we made some changes to this year, which we make changes to every year. We think we've made a lot of very interesting clarifications here. It comprises of quite a number of questions. After this, I Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we will be sending out links to the questionnaire so that you can take a look over this. You can get copies of this in Word and PDF. You can distribute this within your organization to help gather answers, figure out responses. So there's some time spent on that. The second part is providing some supporting documents and descriptions. It's very important to note that this is complementary to the things that we ask within the questionnaire. We're trying to get a sense of how your program and how your organization truly does work, giving us some of that rich description behind what happens every day and what makes your organization special enough to be designated as a world's most ethical company. We have guidance on the supporting documentation, which will help guide you through trying to locate and find the appropriate documents and how to get them to us in a way that helps our review process better understand your organization. The third and final part is the 2022 application fee. For 2022, those of you who've participated in past years, for 2022, the fee is $3,500 US. We have a new system where you can pay this online. But yeah, that's really the third and last part of all of this. Let's see, what's the next?
A few questions, Neil, from the floor as well.
Sure.
So there was one individual who asked, by questionnaire, do we mean survey? Yeah, we'll use those terms interchangeably throughout the presentation today. And another question regarding, once we've done steps 1 and 2, do we wait until the assessment is complete to see if any action items need to be carried out first, or are you ready to apply having completed the first 2 steps? I think you're going to touch on that, Neil, the order in which you can submit these in the very next page.
Yes. You can submit the fee first. You can then put all your documents together and then go in and put in the questionnaire. Really, there's not a whole lot of difference between when you do these, although quite honestly, it makes a bit more sense to complete the questionnaire, and while you're doing that, find documentation that helps support your responses to the questionnaire. We often see a lot of organizations submitting the questionnaire and then making sure they have the right documentation in place and then submitting that to Ethisphere. Again, it can be done in any order that you need. Simply take a few minutes and recognize which particular order works best for your organization and your needs. Just a quick reminder, all of the materials, and I know you're going to work quite a lot of time on finding the right materials and answers. All of these materials, the fee, the documentation, and hitting submit on that questionnaire is due on or before Friday, November 12th, 2021 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern US time. So if you have a calendar, make a big circle, put something in your email calendar for that. That's your absolute drop dead date for there. If you are having issues getting something together, feel free to reach out to our team. We'll give you the contact information here in a bit, but generally it's the wmeapplications@ethisphere.com address. Speaking to a bit of the eligibility question from earlier, we do maintain a bit of eligibility criteria here. Although our process is very thorough, it applies to a large range of organizations from across the world of varying sizes and types. There are some organizations where the EQ process, the WMEC process, especially the questionnaire and getting the documents together, doesn't really fit with a number of organizations. And generally, those organizations tend to be not-for-profit colleges and universities, specifically like public universities, governments, governmental agencies, organizations which are government majority owned, government majority controlled, and NGOs. As much as we love the World Bank, for example, they are unfortunately ineligible to participate in the WMEC process.
Hey, Neil, another question came in from the floor as well regarding the previous slide of what we look at as part of the process, the main categories.
Sure.
So speaking to the leadership reputation component, would you be able to touch on examples of media hits that would result in possible issues? And this individual also asked, is there a certain amount of time that generally would need to pass if you came across let's say an adverse media issue, even if it has been adequately resolved? So I'm curious, Neil, if you can perhaps elaborate a little bit more on that reputation piece.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. When Ethisphere performs a media search, we have a 5-year look back period, which means from the point of the start of our review, we look back 5 years to see all sorts of media mentions about your organization. We use the Dow Jones Factiva tool to really go back and see what kind of positive mentions and negative mentions and neutral mentions are in there. Not just to necessarily look at the negative, but to look at the positive and get a sense of that reputation and leadership. But yes, that process does go back 5 years. The same applies toward legal and reputational and any other sort of action that may have happened involving your company, such as a monitorship, deferred prosecution agreement, CIA, that sort of a thing. One thing to note about that is we do review those on a case-by-case basis. We take into consideration any statement or narrative you may have about the situation that you can give to Ethisphere around the particular situation that your organization has been in. It's also important to note that with this 5-year look-back period, we are not only considering when any sort of misconduct or situation happened, but also when it resolved. For example, I'll just throw out a random example. Let's say there was some sort of incident in the late 1990s that was not formally legally resolved until 2020. We would consider the 2020 resolution to be within the 5-year look-back period. Anything further, you are welcome to reach out to our team at the WME Applications email address. You're welcome to address this within a narrative in your submission for WMEC. We are happy to discuss any sort of individual situations if you feel you need to clarify a point.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. To address a few more questions that have come in, the questionnaire is available today. We actually went live with both our documentation guidelines as well as our 2022 Ethics Quotient survey on Tuesday of this week. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, we'll be providing a download link as part of the post-webcast follow-up information. But for those of you who have been in the process in previous years, you should have automatically received an email on Tuesday. So if not, reach out to the team. We'll make sure that we get it back to you and make sure that we have the correct contact information in place. But the questionnaire is available today. And to address another question that came in as well, we provide all elements of the application, whether it be the questionnaire or the documentation guidelines. You're welcome to review in advance of submitting any fee, right? We provide all materials transparently for you to review and to kind of get a sense of whether or not this is an appropriate process for you. So do reach out, do take a look at those materials before you decide. They're freely available, effective today.
And to answer another question, yes, I apologize for going so quickly. The fee is $3,500 US, and that's, again, due by or before November 21st. All right, let's see. So how do you apply? You've looked over the materials, you've decided the fee is okay, you've figured out which kind of contacts are within the company that you need to speak to. So for 2022, we have created a WMEC application portal, and we will supply you as interested applicants with a login to the portal, which is secure, and it is your area for managing your application. You'll see a bit of a screenshot here. It'll, instead of saying example company, it'll have your company name in there. There's some guidance around the documentations. There are links to the application guide, which should help step you through the process. There's a guide to this webcast if you need to come back to this material for guidance. There's also a link to our frequently asked questions so that you have that available there for you anytime. We are also doing some office hours where you will be able to anonymously submit some questions and get answers back. This is really, really a wonderful opportunity to engage with our knowledgeable subject matter experts here to help you understand how can I give the best answers about how our organization works. You can see down here also that, you can track the survey, the processing fee, and the documentation. You can manage that here, and the documentation, it's all in one place, and we will give you that login information there. There is only one instance for login for this portal, regardless of how many people you have at your organization working on it. So it's a shared login, shared password, and you only need the one. You can share it amongst all the people involved in your application. Doug, do we have any further questions around this area? I'm sure we do.
Different questions. Yeah,
okay.
We had one individual ask. So if they happen to have two members of their staff who are working on the application, is there a single login for the team, and hopefully that answered the question. Yes,
and
there is.
That is correct. Yes,
Yeah,
there's only one piece of login information for your team.
That's right. That's right. And there was one other question a while ago about how can I get support throughout this process? We're going to touch on that in a little bit more detail later in the presentation, but I can touch on this now. We have not only the resources Neil articulated in the application portal ready to go today, but then we also make ourselves available through the WME applications at ethisphere.com email address, which we'll publish on these slides here momentarily. And then we're also introducing a new concept called office hours. So every other week, we'll be setting aside dedicated time in this style of format for you to log on, ask us questions, get your concerns addressed in this type of format as well. So we have a few different ways in which we can support you in this process that we'll touch on in a little bit more detail throughout the presentation today as well.
Yes. Yep. Let's see. Okay. So the next line down. How do I apply? Okay. Looking over the ethics quotient survey, one of the things you'll notice on this slide is we have made an adjustment to how we number the sections this year. We've kept the same sort of topics here. We've kept the same sort of areas and roughly the same sort of question count. You'll notice that what used to be called Section 3, corporate governance, is now Section 1, and we've renumbered from there on down, Section 2 being program structure. What used to be the section that followed after that, 4B, around what we call due care, things around conflicts of interest, has been now put more appropriately in with our risk detection, monitoring, and auditing. We felt the materials worked better in there. The flow is a little bit better. But we still have written standards, information about how training and communication work at your organization. Again, your efforts at risk detection, monitoring, and auditing of all sorts of situations, how you deal with enforcement, investigation, discipline, incentives. 7 is how you're measuring your ethical culture. 8 involves your third-party management, dealing with outside vendors, any third parties. 9 is your environmental and social impact area. And 10 is our leadership, reputation, that whole media and leadership area. All right. Any other questions in here? All right. So before you start, it's easiest to download the Microsoft Word and PDF versions of the survey so that you have those available for review. And again, we will supply you with links to these. These are the exact same survey, just simply available in Word and in PDF. We have also created an annotated version of the 2022 survey, which provides a callback to the 2021 survey so you can see where the question numbers have changed, how they align up to the new sections, and where questions and/or responses have changed to show that year-over-year adjustment. For completing the survey, you will have access through that WMEC application portal. It will require the same username and password as your WMEC application portal. So you will not get a separate email with a survey password. It's simply the same username and password you use to log into the portal. So it's all one. You can also complete the survey sections in any order you need. With a slight caveat there, we'll have you fill out the introduction section and the data privacy section ahead of time. Gather up some simple information about, say, your company name ahead of filling out, for example, the ESG section, right? Just so we have the basic understandings in there. Also, something to keep in mind is there is some skip logic within the survey. It often makes sense to, when you're filling out the survey, start with the governance section and go on down. But by and large, you can skip between the different sections.
Hey, Neil.
Yes.
Not to interject, but just we have a few questions that maybe we could address, not to bounce around too much. But going back to what we talked about earlier with regards to reputation, one of the questions that we received is, what about social media? Do you review sites like Glassdoor, layoffs.com, or other social channels? Can you speak to that?
Yes, we do not directly look at other social media sites. We have a research tool through Dow Jones Factiva that we turn to for all sorts of media results. I do believe there may be some social media aspects that they collect on their own, but no, we do not reach out to sites like Glassdoor. We don't scour Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or any of the other major social media sites.
Okay, another question that we received, do you have to answer the questionnaire in one time, or can it be answered in parts?
That's a great question. Yes, you can actually start to fill out the questionnaire, leave and log out, and then come back in and pick up where you left off. The questionnaire automatically saves. One of the best ways to do that is honestly to click the back or next button on the page that you're working, and that will automatically save your work that you've done on that page.
Okay. You have time for a couple more questions before we move on. What about submitting documentation in other languages, so other than English? What's the guidance there?
So our guidance is around submitting materials in English language for ease of our review team. However, if you are unable to find an English language translation of any of your materials, we ask that you submit a narrative document or some sort of explanatory document in English so that our review team gets an understanding of the document that they're looking at.
Okay, one final question, and I'll let you move on. How much time do you estimate would need to be allocated to this process? And I know that that's a tough question depending on the type of organization filling it out.
It absolutely is, Jody. What I say every year is it depends on the size of the organization and the number of people you have working with it, and quite honestly, how much of the survey that you've really got to dig around and find out. Some organizations have it down like this, and they can do it in a matter of a couple of days. For some other organizations where maybe you have individuals who are spread across the globe, where you need to go locate and find a bunch of different information, that may take a month. It certainly is quite varied. If you do come across issues where you need assistance from the WMEC group about, hey, what are you asking for here? We're not quite sure what you're asking for here and what that means. Reach out to us. While we can't tell you where in the organization to find it, if it's unclear what type of document or what type of response we're really trying to go for, we'll try to help steer you in the right direction. Rest assured, it is worth it. The WMEC process, for those who have not been through it, it's a fascinating way to get to know how your organization works, where to find certain touch points in your organization, and really to get a bit of a check-in with your ethics and compliance program and your organizational setup to see where those relationships are strong or could get stronger. And this process is enormously helpful at that.
Yeah, and we should also mention, prior to Neil's life here at Ethisphere, he was at an organization that submitted and was recognized in our process as well. So Neil has been on both sides of the proverbial coin with respect to both evaluating applications, but also submitting the materials as well. So Neil's been has seen it all with respect to that as well. Neil, I apologize for putting you on the spot yet again. Several more questions have been coming in. We had a series of questions about length of or duration of the organization. So let's say an organization has only been in existence for 2 or 3 years. Are they in a good position to apply? And of course, if when doing that 5-year look back for companies that were formed more recently than that 5-year period, is there any detriment behind that as well? The short answer would be no, but certainly if you have any more detail.
Yeah. So we welcome all types of organizations, regardless of whether you've been around for 150 years or 6 months, right? This is about helping understand how your company works, what kind of processes you have in place, and what you have done in order to really show exceptional leadership and just something that we would want to recognize. So we encourage you to apply if you feel that you can fill out the survey, you can find documentation, and bring your best really to our attention. So we definitely welcome it. If your company has only been in existence for 6 months to a year, in that case, what we'll do is look back as far as we can about your organization within media searches, within all of that. There is no detriment if we can only find 6 months worth of information on an organization that's only been around for 6 months. It really is about, hey, what's here in the media about standing out, not necessarily the length of time that they've been standing out. We do take into consideration the fact that, hey, this organization's only been around for 6 months, and we evaluate that on the merits. All right. Anything else?
Another question that's come up several times is, what about making changes to your answers that have been entered? So I'm assuming this is once it's been submitted and you realize you need to make a change. Yeah. How is that handled?
So ideally, this is where I would tell you at the outset, slow down. Take a minute, have it reviewed. A lot of organizations, including the organization I used to work for, we had a process whereby we would go and collect the answers, but then we would have a review period before entering it into the survey. I strongly suggest doing the same at your organization. If, however, there is some extraordinary situation where you need to change a material answer, please reach out to the WME applications group so that we can discuss how to make that sort of a change. I noticed there is a question in here around covering public sector organizations and focusing on private sector as well. Again, I think this speaks back to the eligibility. Our process is not really designed around organizations which are government-owned, government-controlled, or are, for example, a public university. The question process and the evaluation process just simply is not set up to effectively evaluate how your organization runs. All right, what else?
And I know we've received a lot of questions about documentation submission, so I think we can touch on that point next.
Yeah. All right. Let's see, where was I? I was looking at this. Yes, so the documents supplementing your EQ surveys and answers, they really do, as I had said before, show us the quality of your programs and your processes, your practices, all of that. We do have that separate documentation guidance, so we're trying to get you a description of those documents, and we're trying to also give in there a bit of an explanation of why we're asking for that. Again, this documentation guidance will be available on the application portal. Good to note, not every section has a documentation requirement. We are not asking you to prove up your answers with documentation. This is solely for our review team to be able to better understand the practices and processes and day-to-day situation at your organization. We're not asking you to prove up, every single accomplishment that your board of directors has had. As wonderful and storied as your board of directors is, we don't need to know every single thing about them. We want to emphasize quality over quantity. We know you have a lot of great examples out there. A higher volume of materials really doesn't provide an advantage. If you can, find those core examples, those 3, 4, or 5 of a given item that we're requesting. I mean, if it is kind of a thing where we're asking for a couple of examples, or in some instances, that one example that really does shine for how you put your program together and how your organization leads at what it does. We would rather see that 1 or 2 quality items over 50 different items that we have to sort through. Ideally, complement your documentation with a short description. Our reviewers, they're wonderful people. They really, really strive to get through this. If you can help them with a bit of a short description, understand and get some color behind how your practices work and why you've decided on the document you have and why you've submitted that to us, that is a wonderful help. Again, keep it short, keep it sweet. If you were to put yourself in the shoes of a reviewer, somebody who has, some time, but not all of the time in the world to really kind of understand how your company works and how the processes work, gear it toward that. Redaction is welcome. If you have parts of your company or certain documents where your leadership is not comfortable giving us an unredacted document, suggest back to the company or take it upon yourself to redact sensitive areas of a document. By all means, don't give us anything that would breach a legal agreement or would reveal some sort of a trade secret. We don't want to have to get into a situation with that, but we do want to make sure that you are comfortable submitting documentation to this. Make sure that your redaction, when you do it, is complete and fairly thorough and is up to usual best industry standards for when you do that.
A question about the written descriptions you had mentioned. So do we prefer a short description accompanying the document, or are we referring to more of a narrative of an entire section?
So that actually brings up an interesting point. To first answer your question, a short description that complements the document for something we could not read within the document, or a little bit of additional context that might help us understand why the document is put together the way it is or used in a certain way, is perfectly fine. A longer narrative isn't necessary, with maybe one exception. If you're unable to produce a document, or if there is some situation where there isn't a good way to give us a document and you need to give us a narrative in order to explain to our review team how something works, by all means, we encourage that. So I would first turn to, as a primary source, a document. If you need to, a short description around that. And if you're not able to do that, work towards a narrative.
That's right. And we have within our documentation guidelines specific references where we think these written descriptions would be most helpful. So while Neil did a great job of describing it in general terms, do reference the specific itemized list within that documentation guideline file that we do provide for the specific cases where we believe those descriptions would be most helpful. So do lean on those.
I did notice one particular question come in, whether or not we share these documents. We absolutely do not. We keep everything confidential. We actually have a confidentiality area within the introduction to the WMEC. The only reason that we use or look at these documents is solely for the WMEC review process. We do not share these documents with any other organization or outside party. And we keep these secure. The submission process is actually well, it's it's encrypted. It's encrypted at rest. It's encrypted in transit. So we take every reasonable precaution to make sure that your documentation is seen by no one except the WMEC review team and used for no other purpose than WMEC review, unless you explicitly tell us what to do with it. We do have a destruction period mentioned as well.
Yeah, and for the individual who asked about the types of formats of materials and formats of materials we ask for, yes, we do take PDF, Microsoft Office files. The generally accepted file formats that we use on a day-to-day basis are generally fine. We do accept other mediums such as video files, audio files for those organizations who want to share communications in those formats. We do welcome those as well. If you have a question, let us know. But generally speaking, we're fairly flexible on the types and sizes of files that can be shared.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news for some organizations. This year, Ethisphere is not accepting paper-based or binder-based application materials. I know this will make a few of you very sad. It may make some of you very happy, as you can now move away from this. Due to the rather distributed nature of working these days, we wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to have their materials reviewed in a more modern fashion. And it allows our review team to be able to more quickly go through your materials and more accurately understand how you've organized the materials.
That's right, Neil. We appreciate you being the bearer of bad news. So thank you, Neil. We had a great question just come in about can organizations resubmit the same evidence document from previous years? And does it still apply to the resources of the responses provided, or is it considered outdated? You're welcome to use in the we would suggest referencing your old materials or your previously submitted materials in consideration for submission this year. Do realize the documentation has changed. The request has changed since last year. We do have an annotated version of our documentation guidelines we have developed to indicate exactly where those changes have taken place. But to let all previous applicants know, we do not retain or have not retained documents for previous years, nor will we consider them part of the application, right? So you're welcome to resubmit the relevant documents for this year, but do keep in mind that we did not retain anything from previous application years. So anything you think we have already, you'll need to resubmit as part of this process as well.
There's also a great question about for companies with footprints across the globe, how is this going to be evaluated considering your locations? We do take into consideration, if you are a Japanese headquartered company and you have operations across a number of different continents, different regions, that your processes may change, your situations may change, your documentation may change. We do take that into consideration. Again, each company is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. We do have organizations that are quite small in size and scope, and they are not directly compared in some ways to much, much larger, multinational global corporations in exactly the same way. We use a slightly different criteria for evaluating them. Again, what we're trying to do is understand your best practices and your leadership.
That's exactly right. Oh, sorry. One of the
Go ahead.
questions, I'm not sure if you saw, is there any limitation as to the format of materials that are submitted? So PDF, Excel, Word, anything along those lines that people need to be aware of?
Well, that brings up an interesting question. I would say we've had some submissions in the past where in good faith and good intention, some companies have attempted to create a very, very, very large single document for our review. I would say it's not optimal for the review team to be able to wrangle with one large document. We would ask that you please try and separate out your documents into the required areas and folders and subject matter topics so that the reviewers can review that on a topic by topic basis. As for file formats, I would avoid trying to use highly technical or highly outdated file types. For example, a Lotus 123 spreadsheet is probably not going to be easily openable in this day and age. But yeah, it's try and keep the file sizes reasonable. If you could open it on a relatively new Macintosh or PC computer, you're probably in decent shape with a standard Office product on it. What else do we have in the question queue here?
Neil, another question was, you talked about descriptions of some of the documents where maybe we can't understand from the document itself. And then the question was, how do you add that description? Do you try to put a description in the document? Do you have a separate file? Is there a preferred format there?
For our review team, I would say it's probably easiest to have a separate file that accompanies that file within that folder, because things will generally be organized by folders. If you have a secondary description file, that often works quite well. I have seen from time to time companies using a note format on a PDF, but that's rare. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Generally, the easiest way to get that through is if you need to make a short commentary or a short narrative, I would place that as a separate file in the same folder as the document you're attempting to show us.
Neil, slightly off topic, a few questions came in about interacting with the new applicant portal. Yes, multiple users will be able to interact with that at the same time. And auto log out is I believe part of that as well. So there will be a timeout feature that's a part of that. And I think we'll touch on that a little bit later, but yes, those are multiple users can interact with the platform, and there is a timeout feature as well.
Yeah. I also noticed one question about why were the question references removed from the documentation guidelines and whether or not we have them available. I'm happy to speak to this unless you want to, Doug, but the concept, we wanted to decouple the documentation from, again, kind of backing up a specific question. We wanted to make sure that the documentation that you're providing speaks more to a topic rather than simply a question. We do review the documents by topic area rather than by an associated question. What else do we have coming up here? Ooh, let's see. Jody, anything you want to jump on?
There's a couple that I'm going to address when I was speaking just a few minutes here. So I'm going to hold on those. One question is that somebody asked is how many companies were included in the list last year? So that was one of the questions that we didn't address earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting, Neil. So for the 2021 World's Most Ethical Companies year, we recognize 135 companies around the world. And it's generally for any given application year, between 125 and 135 for the volume of companies recognized. As we'll touch on here momentarily in terms of what the reviews process looks from our side, the number of honorees in a given year ultimately depends upon the mix of companies that go through the process. This is a comparative process by its nature. We align companies by their peers to make comparisons based on performance and submissions. So depending upon the diversity of that mix and the depth with which we have applicants that fall into each of these different peer groups, really dictates how many companies ultimately arrive on that list. So we'll touch on that here in more detail shortly, but that is a quick summation of that point.
There's an excellent question here around whether or not going through the portal whether or not access to our Box server is required to upload documentation. I'll put this out there. You do not need to have a Box account in order to upload documentation to us. If for whatever reason it is technically difficult for you to be able to log in to Box using one of the logins that we help set up for you, we will discuss that with your team and make arrangements for some alternate transfer. And we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis. But you do not need to go out and purchase a Box membership. You don't need to buy anything in order to have access and to be able to submit documentation. What else do we have? Let's see, Doug, I think you're working on one here.
Yeah, I transitioned to the next slide as well, Neil.
Okay, great.
Continue to curate questions.
Okay, and again, it is a $3,500 US dollar fee, regardless of organization this year. This is a one-time fee. It is for our review team to be able to review, access the materials, go through the WMEC process. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes here. You're able to request an invoice if you need to go through a process with your procurement group. That's perfectly fine. We are able to accommodate that for you, so long as you can give us information to be able to fill out the invoice so that you can put that through your procurement process. Or if you're able to, you can pay that online with a credit card, all from within the WMEC application portal. When you submit payment information, please allow 48 hours for your payment status to be reflected in the WMEC application portal. As speedy as we are, we cannot make everything turn around like that for payment. So we please ask a bit of your patience for that. Beyond that, feel free to come to us and ask, hey, how is this working? Is there anything else we need to do?
Great, thank you, Neil. One other question came up regarding the window of time with which we evaluate companies, right? So what's the window of time with which answers and documentation should be addressing? Is it November 2020 to November 2021? Is it calendar year 2021? Do you want to elaborate a little bit on the timing?
Yeah. So generally, we're trying to see what you've done for the majority of 2021. Although technically, we can take stuff from the back end of 2020. We know that tends to bleed into 2021, given that everybody's planning for the year ahead. Yeah. So if you want to be very technical about it, yes, we can look from November of 2020 all the way up to and including November of 2021. We ask that you tell us about your program's current state, where applicable, throughout the EQ questionnaire. If we ask about prior practices or future practices, please answer it then. But by and large, what we're asking for is current state or the way that things were throughout that period. What else do we have here? Do we have anything else? All right. Doug, do we need
other questions? I think Neil will cover in later sections of the presentation.
Seeing the one that you're seeing, yeah.
Yep. Great. So let's take a minute so we've talked about the components of what's required to apply. Let's walk you all through a little bit of what then happens from the evaluation side, right? So we've asked that you review and submit the Ethics Quotient survey, that the documentation guidelines are considered and reviewed and then submitted as well, and then the application fee component. So what happens after all that's been submitted? So the way in which the list selection is made is your initial results, the Ethics Quotient survey, result in what we call a self-reported Ethics Quotient score for an organization, right? This is kind of a baseline automated score generated from your survey results. However, that's just the first step. From there, the evaluation team in collaboration will review the documentation provided, both from a qualitative review of the materials, and make adjustments to that initial EQ score based upon what we're seeing, right? And that includes both a review of the maturity and quality of the components included in the documentation, as well as the written descriptions provided as part of that documentation submission. So we take that into consideration. We then also factor in the reputation review, right? So as Neil had mentioned, we do a 5-year look back with respect to an adverse media search through our partners at Factiva and other publicly available media and data sources. We look at outstanding litigation, history of misconduct, just generally the overall ethical track record of an organization, which then factors into that leadership reputation score as well. And so that's all reviewed: documentation, reputation, as well as the actual survey responses, including any comments or open-ended text responses you provided as part of the survey. That's all reviewed by the team. And then modifications are made to the underlying score based upon that input. And then what we then arrive at is essentially an organization's final ethics quotient score, right? And this is then the score that is applied to the organization. And then from the entire applicant pool for any given year, applicants are then categorized based on their what we call operational and risk profile. So generally that's driven largely by sector, geographic reach, and operational structure. We group like companies as best we can across different dimensions, compare those scores as part of that discussion process, look at that reputation review to consider if there's any significant factors that may underpin that review. And then those performing the best in that context for each of those different categories then make the list for a given year. And so that at a very high level is the assessment process that's undergone from our side. Neil, anything to elaborate on that I perhaps overlooked, or any detail you want to provide to that as well?
No, that generally makes sense.
Okay.
So,
Great. So again, that just gives you a flavor of what we do on the review side when looking at applications. And now I'll turn it over to, I believe it's Jody. Jody, you want to touch on what changes we made for this year in particular, both from a documentation and a ethics quotient survey standpoint?
Sure, Doug, and I know that this has been touched on a little bit earlier, so I'm just going to reiterate a few things, and I encourage you to look at the annotated version. This is really going to be largely applicable to those of you who have engaged in the WME application process before. I encourage you to look at the annotated document so that you can really see what has changed. For those of you who have engaged with us in the past, you do know that the EQ survey it changes year over year. Some years, the changes are less substantial than others. And this year, I think probably looking at this fairly and objectively, it is a little bit more of a substantial change to the application this year. However, a lot of the changes were really designed to clarify. We get, we get feedback from the community to, with questions relating to language that we feel was clear, but then applicants feel is not clear, obviously. So we try to then, of course, go back and revise some of the language to make clarification there. Of course, as Neil and Doug had mentioned, there was a large structure change to the survey overall. This is discussed in detail in the annotated document, so look there. So it is going to look very different, but as far as the content, I wouldn't say a lot has been removed. We did remove some questions. For example, background checks, we removed those questions from the survey this year. We added in some questions this year. We added in questions relating to risk assessment process that for those of you who have been with us for a long time, you may remember that they kind of disappeared for a while. We reintroduced them this year. So so as far as this goes, it's always, I know this is cumbersome, the survey is cumbersome for applicants. We really are trying to ask for the information that we really want to see in the most straightforward and clear manner that we can. So keeping that in mind. As far as substantive changes, there were some areas where there are more substantive changes. As I mentioned, risk assessment. In the detection, monitoring, and auditing section, you're going to see new questions there, as well as manager training. So the manager training section, we are asking for, there are more questions on this, and it's really trying an effort for the team to understand in better detail how you're training your managers. Historically, the team has received documentation, and a lot of times it wasn't very clear who was receiving the training, was it required for each of these instances, and it led to a lot of confusion. So we really made a significant effort this year to provide clarification here. And this is where those narratives come in. You're going to see in the documentation guidelines that there are requests for narratives in some areas. So for example, going to back to that manager training section, that there is going to be a request for narrative there. So that again, it's so we can better understand what is being, what training is being provided to your managers, what communications. So I think that was it for this year. Doug, is there anything that I have missed that we haven't touched upon earlier?
No, just the fact that we really can't emphasize enough just how helpful the annotated versions are for those who have seen previous year surveys, or for organizations who have gone through a benchmarking exercise using the 2021 version of the survey. Take a look at those annotated versions of the files. They're available not only on the applicant portal, but also in your in the 2022 application guide that'll be sent immediately after today's presentation. So take a look at that. You'll get a real line-by-line comparison of how things have adjusted. But no, Jody, that was a great description thematically of what's changed for this year.
Couple of questions I was just going to address really quickly. One was, how are we going to evaluate training considering COVID, social distancing? Obviously, this is a situation that everybody is dealing with. So PowerPoint presentations, scripts. If you don't have a PowerPoint, you probably I would assume you probably have a PowerPoint deck. That would be preferred compared to scripts. Scripts are kind of leave a lot subject to interpretation. So PowerPoint would be preferred, but we definitely understand that training is not the way it has been historically. So that would be just fine. Any other questions here, Doug, before we move on?
We have a few more, but I think they may be more relevant in the presentation as we go on.
One question here. Do you contact applicants for clarification on any elements identified after the applications are submitted? Doug, can you speak to that a little bit from a process standpoint?
Great question. So, excuse me. Regarding the evaluation team reaching out to applicants, so there's only a few contexts in which we will proactively reach out to you for clarification, and they are that there was either nothing submitted from a documentation standpoint, so we want to confirm with you that in fact was the case and that there were no technical issues as part of that process. 2, if within your documentation submission, if there are materials referenced in your written explanations or in other parts of the survey, perhaps, if documents are referenced that are not provided, we will also inquire about the nature of those documents that could in fact be missing. Again, to accommodate the fact that there were perhaps a technical issue during the upload process. And then we also, if there's an issue accessing specific files, if there's a file type we're not able to access, we'll also follow up with you to get a proper file conversion there as well. So those are 3 contexts where we will be proactively reaching out. To be clear, we don't know if the volume of materials provided was in fact the final amount. So we won't be confirming or reaching out proactively to determine if the volume of submissions was accurate, right? The amount of documentation was in fact final. We leave that's incumbent on you to let us know, and that's done. So in those limited instances, we really reach out. And Neil, I believe in certain reputation concerns as well, if we encounter a reputation issue that we need help in understanding, we'll also reach out on a case-by-case basis with respect to some of those issues as well. So it's those limited contexts where we will be proactively reaching out. In all others, it's we do not. That's a matter of policy.
Absolutely right, Doug. Absolutely right.
Great. So I know we're almost at the top of the hour. We have a few more slides to touch on. I'm going to go a little bit quicker. Hopefully, Neil and Jody, you all can stay attuned to the questions as they come in. So how to get started, right? For those of you on the line who are brand new, here's the first steps we recommend you taking. If you have not already done so, jump to the World's Most Ethical Companies website, fill out our applicant interest form to get you into our system and the materials in your hand as soon as possible. Now, if you've applied last year, if you've engaged with us in filling out a similar interest form prior to this week, you should have already received your materials on Tuesday. So if you have not, check your clutter, check your junk folders. We sent everything out on Tuesday. That includes access to all the materials we discussed today, access to the portal, access to the EQ survey, your unique login and password. That should have all been sent on Tuesday. If you did not see it, reach out to us. We'll be happy to work with you to make sure that we resend that or make sure that we have the right primary contact information on file. And that's the first step. Naturally, once those materials do come in, take a look and review the ethics quotient and documentation guidelines. Even for you on the line, those of you on the line who are simply merely interested in the process but haven't quite committed on whether or not to apply, you're welcome to review these in advance of making that decision, right? We transparently share everything with the community. So you all are well aware what's involved in this process well in advance of you starting, right? So even if you're interested, get signed up, get access to these materials, take a look at what's required to see if this is a good fit for your organization. And then from there, leverage us as your support, right? So I had mentioned we have office hours coming up. Every other week, we'll have sessions just like this to walk you through commonly asked questions that we're receiving as a team. You can ask us questions live in that form as well and anonymously, so we can get those addressed. You can reach out to us via email. And we have a series of resources, research data provided as part of that portal for you to reference throughout the process as well. So be sure to leverage those materials throughout.
Yeah, and key to all of this, start early. Grab your copy of the survey, start looking it over, start identifying the parts of the organization you're going to need to talk to, and start figuring out how to get the right answers from them. Start mapping things out. Use the PDF, use the Word version of the EQ survey to solicit input. Break parts of that out, send it by email. Make sure they have a bit of context as to what they're answering and why, and prepare those responses in advance of completing the survey online. You will save yourself a ton of time. Again, start early, figure out where you need to go, heed the FAQ section of the application portal, attend our office hours where we can help you answer a lot of these critical questions and get you guidance on where you need to go. Ideally, designate a single individual to own the survey and the application process. A single point of contact is one of the most successful things you can do. Use the documentation guidelines when you're gathering and organizing and preparing that submission. That will give you key insight into the topics and areas that we're interested in. Download, if you've submitted before, a copy of your previous EQ survey results from the WMEC application portal, and that'll be coming soon. Again, couple that with the annotated version to help figure out A, where you can transfer answers, and B, what you need to change in the meantime as your practices have changed from year to year. And finally, save a record of your application and material for future years. Future year you and future year teams will appreciate it. You will have an opportunity at the end of the survey to review your answers and to download a PDF copy, as well as I believe it will also email you a copy of those responses. So save that somewhere, keep it for the next group, keep it for the future you that may apply, and you get to start this whole evaluation process over again.
Thank you, Neil. From here, I'd like to turn over to our colleague, Sean. Sean, you want to perhaps illustrate for the community what you can get by applying, some benefits of recognition and other general benefits to those who go through our process?
Absolutely. Thank you. Obviously, everyone joining us today is interested in becoming recognized as one of the world's most ethical companies, which we consider the destination, going through the process. But it's really also about the journey. And I know that's a bit of a cliche to say, but it is honestly true. And feedback that I've received from members of the community in the past, while in my relatively new role at Ethisphere and previously in my 5 years in the ethics and compliance industry, I have heard time and time again that people really value the process of going through the world's most ethical companies application process. So for everyone, regardless of who you are, where you're from, going through that process, you really have the opportunity to benchmark your company in 5 core categories against global leaders. To identify areas of strength and areas of improvement. Increasingly regulators and regulatory bodies worldwide are expecting benchmarking and data about your program to be accessible and to prove that you have done that work. We consider this to be among the most comprehensive benchmarks you could undergo. So whether you are selected or not, going through the process of benchmarking your company and answering that questionnaire will be pretty instrumental and foundational in demonstrating that you have done the work to benchmark and measure yourself in your ethics and compliance program, your leadership, your culture, your ESG efforts, and your those core aspects, those 5 core areas. Now, in doing so, and obviously putting in the work to complete the process, you're also demonstrating a commitment to ethical business to your employees, to your consumers, to your investors, and to your stakeholders. That commitment is, reinforced if you are recognized, and if you do have that recognition, if you're able to, proudly tout that and feature that on your website and attend the gala and the recognition ceremony after the process. But one way or another, you can lean into the fact that you are applying for this process and demonstrate to your employees that your organization is really invested in ethical culture and in those core aspects that people really care about these days. And lastly, this process can't be completed alone. So many ethics and compliance functions or responsibilities can happen in a silo, for better or for worse. Going through the process will force you to collaborate in the best way possible with other stakeholders across different functions in your business, whether it be marketing, whether it be accounting, whether it be your C-suite, your board of directors. This will create collaboration opportunities for you to work with those people to find the answers to the different questions in the questionnaire, and hopefully build relationships with compliance that will give you that seat at the table that you might be hoping to achieve, or demonstrate the importance of compliance to the core business. Now, if you're an existing BELA member, BELA is the Business Ethics Leadership Alliance. For anyone unfamiliar with that, there are currently over 330 members around the world, organizations, and that account for thousands of employees around the world with ethics and compliance responsibilities who partake in that BELA community. We consider it one of the largest communities of ethics and compliance practitioners globally. If you do apply, when you complete the application, you won't just receive a personalized scorecard with your performance in relation to the process, but we're also going to curate BELA resources from our member hub specific to the areas that you are strong or need improvement in. We're also preparing exclusive insights and data and reporting only for our BELA community from the data that we collect through this process. And then we will also have increased opportunity for Ethisphere magazine profiles and our Global Ethics Summit conference to spotlight the work that you are doing, whether or not you are recognized. If you make the list or if you don't make the list, if you're really, really strong at certain things, we're going to want to spotlight you and make sure that you receive the attention and recognition for that you deserve, for being really, really good, in, if not at all 5 categories, in 1 or 2 of them. And for non-BELA members, for members of our community that are not necessarily in the Business Ethics Leadership Alliance today, we really want to help you connect with these people around the world who are invested in having a really strong ethics and compliance program, and who are really passionate about this field and constantly looking to do better. So everyone who completes the application process who is not a BELA member, whether or not you are recognized as one of the world's most ethical companies, will receive a 3-month associate level BELA membership, which comes with access to our member hub. Our member hub is resources, templates, tools, examples, case studies, not just from the Ethisphere team, but contributed by the BELA members in our community. So different BELA members throughout the year are submitting case studies and policies and training examples and presentations and other things that they've actually used in their program, in their company, into this BELA hub. You will have access to that, as well as to one roundtable. We host a series of roundtables across different themes, tied to the 5 core areas in the WMEC application around the world. You'll be able to attend one of those and network with members of the BELA community through that. And you will also receive that scorecard. So again, whether or not you are recognized and you ultimately make the list, you will really understand where you're strong, where you could improve, and have access to a number of resources and people who can help you get there eventually as you continue in your journey.
Fantastic. Sean, we had a question regarding when that associate level BELA membership will start.
Yeah, our intention is for the BELA membership, the associate level BELA membership, to start at the end of the application process. So in early 2022, when after the window closes in November, in early 2022, we'll start delivering the scorecards and delivering, the list. In that, the first 3 months of the year, we don't have the exact date yet. We'll let people know shortly. I believe it'll be early February, but that's a little flexible right now. We intend on basically bringing in everyone as a class. So all members will be able to join at the same time in early 22 and have that 3-month trial.
That's right. And we had mentioned dates. Here's a list of all the important dates upcoming for the community as well. Of course, the application itself went live on Tuesday, so we're officially have begun the 2022 World's Most Ethical Company season. I had mentioned the office hours, our first of which is starting next week, next Wednesday, on August 18. We'll have another one on September 1 and again on September 15. This comprises our first season or tranche of these open hour office hour sessions. So be sure to join if you have a question or would like to learn more. And of course, all materials are due 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, November 12th as well. So key dates within the application window to keep in mind. And then you can expect to get your results back starting the very end of January of 2022. We will be notifying every company privately. And for those who are not recognized on the list who do apply, you will be notified privately, and we do not make any mention of non-honorees at all publicly, right? This is a very confidential process. We make sure to disclose that privately to you, and there's no other mention of it in any other media assets that we have. So that's done to you privately. The public pronouncement will take place approximately about February 15 of 2022. And then, of course, for devotees on the line who recall our annual Global Ethics Summit, we're scheduled to have it again, this time in person, fingers crossed, in March of 2022 in New York City. We're exploring some great new hybrid-like environments that combine a lot of the great work the team put on this year with respect to the 2021 Global Ethics Summit and the great online format that we used, combined with an in-person experience. A lot more to come from the team on that in the coming months, but you can expect to have that in March. And then, of course, between March and April, we'll begin delivering the scorecards, the benchmarking, the resources Sean had mentioned, as well as opening up benchmarking consultations around that time as well. So a lot going on. It's a busy season as always. And then, of course, if as you all make your way through the process, we are available for your questions. Our email address is on the slide here in front of you. You can reach out to Neil, myself, Jody, and others through that mechanism, and we welcome questions as part of that as well. So again, we're all extremely excited to get this process underway. We welcome you all to engage with us as part of the 2022 World's Most Ethical Companies process, and we look forward to speaking with you all at a future time. Neil or Jody, any other questions we'd like to address before we wrap today that have come in?
One question, Doug, real quickly. Can applicants access the adverse media search results so they can understand the other elements that impacted their score?
So we don't share specific output on the reputation side. However, as I believe Neil had mentioned, we use a research tool, Factiva, to generate a lot of the output for the reputation review. So between Factiva and just a public media search are the vehicles we use as an assessment team. You can use the same processes yourself to get a sense of what we're looking at, but we don't share any output from that process, specifically highlighting exact events from that research as well.
We also had another question about whether an exclusive membership to Bella is part and parcel of participating in WMEC. We want to make very clear that Bella membership is not a requirement or prerequisite to participating in WMEC. We welcome all sorts of people, regardless of whether or not you are a membership in Bella. Membership in Bella does not confer any advantage to you within this process, and we do not take it into consideration within any of the review parts.
Doug, another question about payment. Given a 48-hour for payment to go through, does that mean it should be submitted before the November 12th deadline?
No, you're welcome to submit that on the 12th, right? As long as it's gone through or an invoice has been requested before the 12th, that satisfies that requirement. But no need to plan on submitting payment on the 10th or earlier as a result of that delay. Not at all. And just to reiterate, we ask that all materials are submitted on or before that November 12th date, and they can be submitted at any point before then in any order that you choose. So you're not beholden to follow any specific order. You're welcome just to submit as the different parts are completed between now and November 12th.
Hey, Doug, one other good question, if your perspective on this. If a document is relevant to more than one question, how should that be accounted for? Should it be submitted more than once in the different folders, cross-referenced in some sort of Word document? What's the preferred method when submitting a document that relates to many questions, maybe?
Yeah, so we may, amongst the assessment team, have a slightly different point of view. I will articulate mine. I think a practice that's worked well from what I've seen. I actually prefer having it referenced or brought up in multiple folders as it's applicable. So if there's a specific file that is relevant to measuring culture as well as training, for example, put it in both sections of the submission, and you can provide a description to supplement, why that might be the case, right? So I'm a fan of the redundancy of providing it in both areas. We do tend to review each folder relevant to that specific topic in isolation. So if you do have that redundant file provided, that gives us a chance to make sure that we catch it as part of that review.
Certainly agree with that. Yes, the redundancy does help avoid any accidental overlooking of documentation.
Great. Well, fantastic. Again, I want to give a quick thank you to Jody and Neil and Sean for joining today. Thank you as always, Chelsea, for keeping us organized, and apologies for going so late on today's webcast. But again, Here's our email address for those of you still on the line. Reach out with questions at any point. We're welcome to see you all next week during our first office hours session. Look at the resources provided on the portal. Let us know how we can help. Get your questions answered. But thank you again for attending today. We're again very excited to get the session underway for 2022 and look forward to engaging with you all over the next several months.